Why the Space Marines have no fear. They say we were made fearless. That is not true. We were made unable to understand fear. There is a difference. Fear is not cowardice. It is the shadow of understanding, the knowledge that something matters enough to lose. They took that from us long before we first donned armor. My name no longer matters. My chapter, my heraldry, my wars, they are dust, scattered across centuries. All that remains of me drifts now in this dead ship, orbiting a star that no longer burns. The air recyclers wheeze. My armor's power pack ticks down like a failing heart. I record this confession into the cogitator core, in case some curious soul finds what is left of me. Perhaps it will be immortal, perhaps one of my kind, perhaps a machine. It does not matter. What matters is the truth behind the oath that shaped us. They shall know no fear. I remember the last time I felt it. I was still human then, thin, hungry, perhaps 10 standard years old. The recruiting priests came to our settlement after dusk, their robes shimmering with oil lamps, their voices heavy with promises. They said the emperor needed sons. They said we would become angels. The men bowed, the women wept, the children we did not understand. When they chose me, I felt pride first. Then, when they covered my eyes, fear. Pure, uncut, simple. They never let me feel it again. The first thing they did was take my name. The second was take my sleep. I remember white halls lined with glass, filled with the hum of Medici drones. We were arranged on cots, dozens of us, our heads shaved, our limbs restrained by soft straps that smelled of sterilizer. A voice spoke to us from hidden speakers. It was calm, soothing, relentless. You are chosen. You will be made whole. Fear is weakness. Weakness is failure. Failure is death. We repeated the words until they became rhythm, not meaning. Then the apothecaries came. They were not cruel. They did not need to be. Their kindness was colder than violence. Needles slid into veins with surgical precision. Something warm filled me. Then numbness, spreading like frost under my skin. The Medici adept monitoring my vitals whispered, cortisol suppression achieved. Another voice. Subject displays minor resistance, increased dosage. The warmth turned to cold. I remember trying to cry and discovering I couldn't. That was the first step. They tell us courage is the absence of fear. That is a lie taught by those who have never been brave. Courage is what exists in spite of fear. Without fear, courage is meaningless. The treatments continued for weeks. Chemical floods, hypno-conditioning, pain inoculation. We learned that panic is a reflex, not an instinct. They trained our bodies to override it, to obey the command voice even as our flesh screamed. They injected gene cultures that rewrote endocrine patterns, dampened adrenaline surges, adjusted synaptic ratios. The human heart, once ruled by fear, was made efficient, predictable, a perfect engine. At night, when the others slept, I watched the orderlies walking the halls in silence. They were human still, fragile, quick to flinch at sudden noises. I envied them. They could fear, and so they could hope. One boy in the cot beside mine whispered during the 3rd week, "Do you think it will hurt?" I said I did not know. He said, "I hope so. If it hurts, we'll know we're still alive." He was gone by morning, transferred, they said, to Phase 2. I never saw him again. Phase 2 began with the Black Lectures. They moved us to a stone amphitheater beneath the training fortress. At the center stood a chaplain. Black armor polished to a mirror sheen. Crozius held like a relic of judgment. He recited litanies from memory, voice deep enough to rattle the ribs. The Emperor is our father. The Emperor is our fear. The Emperor is the end of fear. We repeated after him, hundreds of voices echoing through the dark. The rhythm replaced thought. Every word struck like a hammer forging belief. They taught us to picture the Emperor's face not as mercy, but as fire, consuming, absolute. When the mind trembled, we were to see that fire and step into it willingly. To disobey was not sin, it was impossibility. After each lecture, they injected us again. Cortical dampeners, hypno-indoctrinal pulses. Our dreams began to blur. One endless loop of marching, drilling, burning, praying. I woke one morning unable to recall my mother's voice. A week later, I could no longer picture her face. Fear faded with memory. They were the same thing. Some of us broke. They called it neural rejection. Too much fear remained, too much self. The chaplains called them failures. The apothecaries called them donors. We watched them carried away, knowing parts of them would live on inside us. Their blood became reagent. Their bone became template. Their courage fed our design. I learned later what they had done to us in those months. The amygdala restructured. The hippocampus rerouted. They rewired what made us human into what made us useful. We would no longer feel fear, not of death, not of pain, not even of failure. And because of that, we would never again know the pulse of meaning that fear gives to life. They told us we were blessed. The day of transformation came quietly. We were led into the apothecarian, one by one. I remember the metallic taste of recycled air, the drone of chanting tech priests, the soft hiss of anesthetic vapor. The walls were lined with symbols, sigils of the mechanicum interwoven with imperial eagles. Each incision, each organ implant was a ritual. When the gene seed was placed within me, I convulsed so hard that 2 servitors had to hold me down. They said it was normal. They said my body was learning obedience. Afterward, they lowered me into a sarcophagus of cooling gel. For hours I floated in the dark, half dead, half born. My heartbeat slowed to something mechanical. The world became distant. When I awoke, I was taller, stronger, my senses sharper. But something was missing, some quiet echo that once warned of danger, of mortality. I tested it later. I climbed the fortress parapet during a thunderstorm and stepped off. The ground rushed up to meet me, wind roaring in my ears. I felt the impact, bones shattered. No panic, no cry. Only data, velocity, pressure, damage reports scrolling across my mind. When I woke in the Medici bay, I realized I had learned a truth. A being that cannot fear cannot truly live. We were not men anymore. We were machines of faith wrapped in flesh. Years passed, or maybe only months. Training blurred into war. We were unleashed upon worlds that had forgotten the Emperor's name. The first time I killed, I expected something. Shock, guilt, exhilaration. There was nothing, only purpose. They called that purity. I called it silence. Now, as I sit among the wreckage of my final battle, surrounded by the bodies of brothers and enemies alike, I think of that silence. It has followed me through every war zone, every burning city, every cry for help unanswered. We never ran. We never hesitated. We never feared. And yet, I find myself wondering what it would be like to tremble again, to feel the pulse of uncertainty, that terrible beauty of knowing you might fail. I remember a mortal once, a guardsman, who fought beside us on the walls of a ruined hive. When the sky split and the demons came, he screamed. He screamed and fired until his weapon melted in his hands. He was terrified, shaking so hard he could barely stand. But he stood. He looked at me, eyes wide, tears mixing with ash, and said, "You're not afraid, are you?" I told him no. He nodded once, a strange broken smile on his lips. "Then I'll borrow your courage," he said. He died minutes later. I remember thinking, not of his death, but of that moment. He was alive in a way I could never be again. His fear was his proof of life. My fearlessness was my tomb. I do not know how many wars I have fought since then. Worlds blur together. Enemies change faces, banners, names. The orders never change. Cleanse, burn, hold. They called us angels of death, but I think we were something smaller. Instruments of someone else's will, forged without the flaws that make meaning possible. Fear is a kind of love. Love for the self, love for life, love for what could be lost. They told us love was distraction. They told us duty was enough. But duty without fear is only obedience. The ship groans again. Pressure drops another fraction. I can feel the void waiting beyond the hull, silent and patient. It should terrify me. It does not. I reach for the data slate to continue this record. The servos in my gauntlet whine softly, struggling against the weight of age. I imagine, for a heartbeat, what it would feel like to want to live, to fight against the dark, not out of command, but out of terror at its emptiness. I think that would be true courage, to feel fear and still step forward. They made sure I would never know it, and that is why I record this, to remind whoever listens that we are not fearless. We are empty, and emptiness is not purity. It is the silence left when everything human has been carved away. There were no windows in the indoctrination chambers, only walls of dull grey plasteel lit by the cold pulse of lumen strips that never dimmed. We slept in that light. We woke in it. There was no night, no day, only the rhythm of the sermons. Every hour, a voice would rise from the vox altars embedded in the walls. A different voice each time, or perhaps the same one broken into 1,000 harmonics. It spoke words that carved grooves into the mind. Fear is the chain of the unworthy. The emperor broke his own chain so that we might never tremble again. We repeated it until we could no longer hear it as language, only sound, deep and certain as thunder. They said repetition would fuse truth into bone. They were right. When our bodies healed from the first implants, they sent us to the hypno-theaters. Cables fed into the sockets at the base of our skulls, and we were submerged in nutrient gel. 1,000 hours of combat scenarios poured into our neural pathways, faster than thought, faster than memory. Each simulation tested reflex, obedience, endurance. There was no victory condition, only survival. In those visions, we died hundreds of times, burned, crushed, torn apart. At first, each death jolted us with panic. Our hearts raced, our muscles spasmed. But soon even that faded. By the 100th death, fear had become static. By the 1,000th, it had gone. They did not teach us how to overcome fear. They taught us to erase it. The indoctrinators called us candidates. They did not call us children. We were never to be reminded that we had been born, only that we were being made. Each morning began with the catechism of purpose. We would kneel on the steel decking and recite while servo skulls drifted overhead, monitoring heart rhythms and hormonal balance. We are the Emperor's wrath made manifest. We do not question. We do not falter. We do not fear. A candidate who faltered during the litany was taken away. They said the Emperor's light had rejected them. We learned not to look when the doors closed. When we ate, we were not allowed to taste. The nutrient gruel was laced with chemical binders that dulled sensation. Pleasure, like fear, was an indulgence of the flesh. They wanted the mind to rule the body completely. Even hunger became a command response, not a need. One evening, After the third conditioning cycle, one of the boys, his designation was 7th batch 29, began to weep during recitation. No one had wept in months. We watched him, curious, like men observing rain after years of drought. A chaplain entered the hall. He knelt before the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Why do you weep, child?" "I don't know," the boy sobbed. "It just happens. It's too much." The chaplain nodded slowly. Then he broke the boy's neck, cleanly, without anger. "He was not wrong to weep," the chaplain said, "but the emperor has no use for what he cannot command." We were ordered to recite the creed again. No one stumbled on the words. Months bled into years. We grew taller, stronger. Our bones fused with ceramite latticework. Our blood thickened with synthetic cells. Each organ implanted brought new capacities and new absences. The oculobe sharpened our sight, but made darkness less frightening. The Laraman's organs sealed our wounds instantly, robbing us of the primal fear of bleeding out. The catalepsian node allowed us to rest without dreaming, erasing the night terrors that once kept us human. Piece by piece, instinct was stripped away. One of the apothecaries, a tall man with servo claws instead of hands, said something once while adjusting my neural cables. "You are not being purified," he told me. "You are being edited." He thought I was unconscious. He did not speak again after that. I never saw him during later rounds of surgery. After every operation came indoctrination. Pain was the teacher. Faith was the balm. The chaplains stood above us like black statues, voices resonant with vox distortion. Pain is truth. Fear is falsehood. You will know truth and be free. Free. I remember that word lingering, echoing strangely. They used it often. Freedom from fear. Freedom from failure. Freedom from self. At the time, I believed them. Now I see what they meant. They freed us from being alive. There were rare moments of stillness between cycles. Sometimes I would stare at my reflection in the steel of the training deck. The face that stared back was unrecognizable. Jaw heavy with growth hormones, eyes like polished glass, skin marked with injection scars. When I tried to imagine what had come before, there was only static. Once, I found a scrap of paper tucked into the corner of my cot. Illicit, heretical, human. Someone had written a single line. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. It was an old Terran proverb. I kept it hidden under the mattress for months, reading it each night before the attendants came to check for contraband. It made no sense to me then. How could one master what no longer existed? But something in those words felt like warmth, a spark. When the inspections came, they found it. They made me watch as they fed the paper into a sanctified flame. The chaplain who held me said, "True courage is obedience." He smiled as the fire went out, and I believed him. The first live combat drill stripped away whatever remained. They brought us to the ash waste outside the fortress. Real weapons, live ammunition. Servo drones released targets into the sky, some metal, some human. We were told to engage until our weapons overheated. The first target screamed when my bolt round hit it. I didn't flinch. My squad mates did not pause. When the field fell silent, the chaplain spoke. "Do you feel pride?" "No," we answered. "Do you feel remorse?" "No." "Then you are ready to serve." It is strange looking back. I can describe every physical sensation of that day. The smell of propellant, the echo of detonations, the way the ash turned to glass underfoot. But I cannot recall what it felt like. The emotion of it has been scrubbed clean. Only the data remains. In the records of the Mechanicum, fear is categorized as a psychological inefficiency, They define it as a malfunction in predictive logic. I wonder if they are right. But if they are, why do I still dream of that first night? The oil lamps, the weeping, the moment they took me away. Dreams are not supposed to survive hypno-indoctrination, and yet, sometimes, I think they hide in the corners of my mind, where the machine spirits cannot reach. Years later, when we were finally declared Astartes, the chaplains held a final ceremony. We stood in the Hall of Silence, rows upon rows of us, each wearing new armor, fresh and unscarred. The walls were lined with statues of those who had failed. Their names had been erased. Their faces still wore expressions of terror. The chaplain raised his crozius and said, "Brothers, fear is the father of heresy. The Emperor has purged it from you. Rejoice, for you are perfect." We struck our fists against our breastplates in salute. The sound rolled like thunder across the hall. For a moment, I thought I heard an echo beneath it, a distant cry, buried deep. Then it was gone. That was the last time any of us spoke as men. From that day on, our voices belonged to the choir of the Legion. We spoke as one, thought as one, killed as one. Individuality was the last weakness to burn. And yet, even now, I remember. Not vividly, more like an ember in the dark. A memory of warmth that should not exist. A whisper that asks, quietly, what was lost when fear died. The first war I fought was not glorious. It was instructional. We were dispatched to a dust-choked moon circling a dying sun, a place whose name I never learned, though I remember its taste. Metal dust, rusted air, the bite of oxidized sand. They said the people there had rebelled. I never saw them alive. When the Thunderhawk doors opened, heat slammed against my armor like a furnace door. We deployed in formation, the Codex Perfect. Bolters raised, formation diamonded, machine spirit targeting arrays whispering praise songs through the Vox. I felt nothing. Not anticipation, not dread. Only the mechanical rhythm of my breath. The enemy broke before we even reached them. Mortals, miners, workers, thin and desperate. They screamed. They fired their crude weapons. They ran. We advanced without pause. A lasbolt struck my pauldron. The machine spirit noted minor superficial impact. That was all. I watched a man reload behind a barricade. His hands shook so hard he dropped the power cell. He tried again, sobbing, fumbling. I fired once. He ceased to exist. No blood, no sound, just a body reduced to thermal mist. And in that silence, something stirred. Not pride, not guilt, only curiosity. I remember thinking, this is what fear looks like from the outside. So fragile, so alive. We were congratulated, of course. Our commander, a giant whose voice carried the authority of planets, said the Emperor would be proud. The chaplain blessed us, anointing our armor with promethium smoke. "You have faced the enemy without fear," he said. "You are his wrath given form." We repeated the catechism. We believed it. How could we not? But when night came and I knelt in my cell, cleaning the residue from my bolter's firing chamber, I noticed my hands were steady. Too steady. No tremor, no pulse, no memory of adrenaline. Only a machine performing maintenance on itself. It should have comforted me. Instead, I found myself staring at the streak of blood dried into the weapon's recesses. The smell lingered longer than it should have. Copper and smoke. And something I could not name twisted in my chest. Not grief, not guilt, just emptiness. Over the years, I fought on dozens of worlds. Hive cities where the smog never lifted. Ocean planets where the waves were red with algae that fed on blood. Ice moons where the air froze on the edges of armor plating. In every campaign, we were perfect. In every battle, we were victorious. And in every silence afterward, I listened for something I could no longer hear. The heartbeat of fear. Our commanders called it purity. The Mechanicum called it optimization. The ecclesiarchy called it holiness. But I began to suspect it was rot. There were others who felt it too. We never spoke of it openly. That was unthinkable. But there were glances, pauses, subtle hesitations that only we could notice. A brother who lingered too long over the dead. Another who took unnecessary care to retrieve fallen guardsmen. Little acts that betrayed something beneath the surface. Faint, flickering remnants of humanity that should have been burned out centuries ago. One of them, Brother Sevras, once asked me quietly during rearmament, "Do you ever wonder what courage feels like?" I told him courage was obedience, as we had been taught. He smiled faintly. Then why does obedience feel so hollow? We never spoke again after that. The next campaign, Severus was killed, decapitated by a Xenos blade while shielding a group of civilians. He could have survived if he hadn't stopped to warn them. The chaplain called it a noble death. The apothecaries called it inefficient. I call it proof. Proof that something human still burned inside us, even if only long enough to die. As the decades passed, the line between discipline and apathy blurred. We fought without hesitation because we could not imagine an alternative. Orders came through the Vox. Advance. We advanced. Hold. We held. Die. We died. I began to understand the truth behind the creed. We did not know no fear. We could not comprehend it. The emotion had been excised like a tumor, leaving behind a void that duty filled like resin in a hollow shell. I wondered sometimes if the Emperor had ever meant it to be this way. Was this his vision? Soldiers so perfect they no longer needed to feel? Or had the Mechanicum misunderstood his intent, mistaking divinity for efficiency? There were whispers among the chaplains that some of the earliest gene lines had been flawed, that certain legions had produced warriors who felt too much. They called it weakness. I called it memory. In the quiet between campaigns, I studied the mortals we fought beside, the guardsmen, the serfs, the workers who tended our armor. They trembled before us, yes, but there was something radiant in their terror. They felt, they feared, and still they fought. When a comrade died, they grieved. When a victory came, they cheered. Their lives were short, pitiful, and full. One night, on a campaign that turned the skies of a forest world to cinders, I sat beside a guardsman named Rel. He had been wounded, his leg torn open by shrapnel. I stayed with him until the medici arrived. Not because of compassion, but because command required every Astartes to ensure mortal compliance. But he spoke to me as if I were human. "You don't get scared, do you?" he asked, voice weak. "No," I told him. He smiled faintly. "Wish I could say the same. I'm scared all the time. Scared of dying, scared of living long enough to die slower." He paused, looking up at the burning sky. "But I think maybe fear keeps me honest, makes me remember what I am. You ever think about that?" I didn't answer. By the time I thought of one, he was gone. There is a moment every warrior knows, the heartbeat between the killing and the aftermath, where the world hangs suspended. For most, that heartbeat is everything. The surge of terror, the relief of survival. For us, it is just another breath. When you feel nothing for long enough, you begin to mistake the absence for peace. I have seen brothers walk into firestorms without flinching, even as their flesh cooked inside ceramite. I have watched others laugh amid orbital bombardment, their voices mechanical and hollow. They said we were fearless. But I have seen the other side of that coin. I have seen warriors who stand amid the flames, not because they are brave, but because they cannot imagine why they should move. One campaign, centuries after my ascension, I encountered something that nearly broke through the silence. A demon world, the kind of place where reality thins, where the air itself whispers. Our orders were to cleanse it. We fought for 13 days and nights under a sun that bled light. Every sound echoed twice, once in the air, once inside the skull. During the final assault, we breached a cathedral grown from bone and machine. At its center was a mirror, not glass, but liquid metal, rippling as though it breathed. I looked into it and saw my reflection. Not the armor, not the weapon, not the soldier. Me, the child, the one who had felt fear that night so long ago. He looked terrified, and I envied him. The mirror shattered when I touched it. Fragments fell like mercury, burning through the floor. The chaplains called it a warp illusion. They destroyed the site with plasma charges, but I still see that reflection in dreams. His eyes, wide with something I cannot name. They tell us the Emperor watches. I have wondered what he sees when he looks at us. Not men, not sons, but instruments. The custodes guard his body. We guard his silence. Perhaps that is why none of us speak of fear, because to admit it was taken from us would mean admitting what we lost with it. To speak that truth aloud would be to commit a heresy no chaplain could forgive, the heresy of regret. Sometimes, in the long void voyages between campaigns, I imagine what it would be like if the organ that suppressed fear simply stopped working. If one day I woke and my heart beat too fast, my hands shook, my breath came shallow. Would I be horrified? Or would I weep with joy to finally remember what it means to care? They would call it corruption. I would call it resurrection. Because fear is not weakness. Fear is proof that something still matters. And I would give all the strength, all the victory, all the centuries of unbroken obedience, just to feel it once more. They say the Emperor made us in his image. I have spent 10,000 years trying to understand what that means. If we are his reflection, then the Emperor must be terribly lonely, for in his image we were made silent, perfect, unquestioning. Sometimes when the ship sleeps and the engines hum like a heartbeat too slow to sustain life, I study my armor. The black carapace is the boundary between what I am and what I was. It connects my nerves to the machine, lets me feel the ship's pulse as if it were my own flesh. Once, it was meant to be liberation, man and mechanism as one. Now I think it is a coffin made of blessed steel. When they grafted it to me, they called it ascension. The apothecary pressed his hand to my chest and said, "Your body is no longer yours. You belong to the Legion. You belong to him." I remember the scent of burning flesh as the needles sank into my spine. Each connection a new thread of obedience. Every impulse monitored, translated, tamed. The black carapace did more than link us to armor. It completed the circuit that made us incapable of disobedience. The implants in the skull, the catechistic lobe, the hypnothetic coils, they didn't erase fear alone. They rewrote cause and effect. Pain became instruction. Doubt became treason. And somewhere in that rewiring, the human heart was replaced by something simpler: response. On my last campaign, the Mechanicus requested an autopsy on a fallen brother to study neural degradation after prolonged deployment. I was present as witness. They peeled back the armor, layer by layer, like petals from a sacred flower. What remained beneath was not flesh as I remembered it, but the architecture of control. Fiber optic veins, hormone regulators, neural filters that hummed faintly even in death. The Magos turned to me and said, "Marvelous, isn't it? Such harmony of faith and design. The machine obeys because it cannot do otherwise." I looked down at my brother's hollow chest, his twin heart silent, and wondered if he had ever truly lived at all. Maybe that was harmony. Maybe that was damnation. They call the gene seed a gift, but I have come to think of it as an infection. It spreads obedience through every cell. The progenoid glands ensure that even in death, our compliance will be harvested, refined, and reborn in another. We are not fathers. We are copies, iterations of a single idea that has long outlived its creator. I sometimes wonder if the emperor foresaw this, if he truly wanted sons, or if he only ever wanted soldiers. The custodes are perfection, but they are few. We were the mass production of divinity. Each of us the same prayer repeated until meaning dissolved. There is a sound I hear when I dream now, a mechanical whisper, like gears turning in oil. It says, "You were not made to understand." I think it is the voice of the machine that lives inside my chest, the one that pumps blood without fear. It keeps me alive, even when I no longer wish it to. That, too, is obedience. They told us the Emperor's will flows through the warp like breath, that our purpose is sustained by his divine presence. I have been to the edge of the galaxy, beyond the Astronomican's light. I have fought where the Emperor's name is just another sound swallowed by static. And still, I obey, because the code is written into the marrow. Even if the Emperor himself fell silent, the echo of his command would drive us forward until the end of time. I think that is what terrifies me most about what I have become. Not that I cannot feel fear, but that even if I could, I would not be able to stop. Even if I looked into the void and saw nothing waiting, no God, no Father, no purpose, I would keep marching, because that is what the programming demands. I sometimes imagine the apothecary's hands reaching into my skull again, unplugging the circuits one by one. I wonder what would happen if they pulled the right thread. Would I collapse? Or would I finally, after millennia, feel something resembling choice? There was one time, only once, when something like fear came close. It was on a world swallowed by perpetual night, a place where the sun had died and the seas had frozen into mirrors. We were hunting a demon incursion. The air was thick with psychic residue, and our librarian warned us to seal our minds. We did, but something still slipped through. As we advanced through the ruins, a voice began whispering in the Voxnet. Not words, not even sound, just a pulse that matched the rhythm of our hearts. Each beat faster than the last. For a moment, I felt something alien rise within me. A weight in the chest, a tremor in the hands, panic. Not my own, but remembered, inherited, echoing through blood that had once belonged to a man. The librarian purged the interference. The pulse stopped, but afterward, I caught myself trembling. It lasted less than a breath. I cherished it like a relic. They say the Emperor watches over us. I have begun to suspect that he watches through us. Each gene seed a lens, each soul a mirror angled toward his endless design. Perhaps that is what he meant by perfection. Not freedom from fear, but total transparency of will. No distortion, no resistance, just light passing through obedient glass. And yet, I wonder what he sees in me now. A crack, maybe. A small flaw in the mirror where humanity still hides. If he sees it, he does not strike me down. Maybe he pities me. Maybe he has already forgotten me. Once, during a rare resupply on a shrine world, I saw a child run from a procession of our brothers. He stumbled and fell into the dust, too terrified to rise. His mother tried to pull him up, whispering prayers, but he screamed and hid his face. I reached down and offered my hand. He looked at me as if death itself had spoken. His fear was so pure, so honest, that it seemed to fill the air around him like light. And in that instant, I understood what we had been denied. To fear is to recognize power, not submission, but awareness of fragility. That child, in his terror, understood something about life I never would. When he touched my gauntlet, his hand trembled. Mine did not. He ran. I watched him disappear into the crowd and felt nothing. But later, when I lay in the cathedral shadows, I found myself replaying the moment again and again, as if trying to remember the meaning of a word I once knew. Now, as I drift in this failing ship, the machine in my chest counting down the seconds until power collapse, I wonder, was this the Emperor's first cruelty? Not the wars, not the betrayal, not the endless crusade, but the gift of perfection that stripped his children of the right to tremble. The Mechanicum praises the purity of logic, the absence of emotion. The Ecclesiarchy calls it sanctity. But I think it is a wound that never bleeds, a silence that consumes all song. And somewhere, buried beneath the gene seed and the carapace, there is still a human heart that remembers the sound of its own fear. It beats faintly, trapped under layers of metal and prayer. It will never break free. But I can hear it sometimes, when the engines go quiet. The faintest echo of what was lost. Her name was never given to me. They said she was Ordo Astartes, one of the rare inquisitors tasked not with our destruction, but with our understanding. That alone made her dangerous. The Inquisition fears what it cannot control, and we, by design, are uncontrollable. Yet they still come, sometimes, to study the cracks. She arrived after the war on Carthage Reach, where the manufacturum cities had been turned to glass by our bombardment. The smoke had not yet settled. Ash fell like black snow. My squad was assigned to escort her through the ruins. She was small, fragile-looking, wrapped in an envirocloak that fluttered like torn parchment in the wind. When she removed her rebreather, I saw that her face was young, but her eyes were ancient. They were not afraid of me. That alone set her apart from every mortal I had ever met. "You fought for centuries," she said, scanning the devastation through a cracked auspex. "What does that feel like?" The question was absurd. We were not supposed to be asked how we felt. We were instruments, not witnesses. I answered as I had been taught. "It feels as the Emperor wills it." She smiled faintly, as though expecting that answer. "Then let me ask differently," she said. "Do you ever remember what you've done?" I paused, not from hesitation, but confusion. Memory for us is linear, efficient. Each battle filed and tagged within the armor's record feed, stripped of emotion, stored for debriefing. I told her this. She nodded slowly. Data without experience. A life remembered by machines. She touched one of the glass statues that lined the street. Once a man, now frozen mid-run, caught in the heat flash of orbital fire. Her gloved hand came away black with soot. "Tell me," she asked, "what did he feel in his last second?" "I do not know," I said. "But you killed him." "Yes." She looked at me, and in her gaze I felt something like pity. "You don't find that strange?" "I find it efficient." We walked for hours in silence. The only sounds were the crackle of settling glass and the occasional whine of cooling metal. The sky above was veiled in smoke so thick the sun had become a pale wound. At last, she said, "They say you feel no fear." "We do not." "How is that possible?" I told her of the surgeries, the chemical taming, the endless indoctrination. I spoke of the litanies that replaced thought, of the organs that muted emotion, of the way fear had been reclassified as error. She listened, expression unreadable. When I finished, she said softly, "That's not courage, that's mutilation." The words struck harder than any blow. I wanted to deny them, to recite the creed as defense, but the words would not come. The silence between us was heavier than the armor I wore. We reached the edge of the ruins, a plateau overlooking what had once been a city of 20 million souls. Nothing remained but slag and vapor columns. She removed her glove and let the ash fall through her fingers. "My father was on a world like this," she said, "an Astartes purification strike. He was a child then. They told him he was lucky to survive. He spent the rest of his life praying to men like you." "I am not a man," I said. She smiled without humor. "No, that's the tragedy." That night, we made camp beside the remains of a transport crawler. She built a small fire, though the heat was unnecessary for me. Its light flickered across the ruin, throwing long shadows. I sat apart, watching the flames. Something about them stirred a distant memory. The taste of smoke from my childhood village, the night before I was taken, the fear, the awe. "You watch fire like it's holy," she said. "Fire is purity," I replied automatically. She shook her head. "Fire is change. Purity doesn't change. It consumes." Her eyes met mine. "Do you ever wish you could fear the fire?" The question lingered in the air like incense smoke. I did not answer. Perhaps she saw the answer in my silence. She said no more. In the morning, she asked to see the interior of my helm. She wanted to record the feed, how our vision filtered data, how the threat recognition patterns formed. When I removed it, the cold air hit my skin like a forgotten sensation. She studied the interface, tracing the neural ports along my temples. "Do you know," she said, "that your brain still produces the chemicals for fear? The glands are active. The organs that suppress the response are the ones that override it. In theory, if they failed, I would panic," I finished. She nodded. "Yes, you'd feel everything, all at once. The horror, the pain, the memories, all the things you've buried for centuries." She looked up at me. "Does that frighten you?" "No," I said, but something in the way my voice caught, barely, almost imperceptibly, made her look at me as though she had caught the shadow of a ghost. Later, as we boarded her shuttle for departure, she stopped at the ramp and turned back to me. "Tell me one thing," she said. "If fear is gone, what drives you to fight?" "Duty," I replied. "Duty to what? To whom?" I hesitated. "The Emperor." She nodded slowly. "And if he told you to stop?" I said nothing. Her eyes softened, and she whispered, "Then maybe that's what fear is, the thing that makes stopping possible." The ramp closed before I could answer. I watched her ship lift into the smoke and vanish. The words she had spoken echoed in my thoughts long after. Possible. Such a small, fragile thing. And yet it felt heavier than all my armor. Months later, I heard she had been censured by her peers. Her report on Astartes' effective suppression was classified and sealed. The order came from Terra itself. Her name was struck from the Ordo Astartes registry. They said she had spoken heresy, that she questioned the Emperor's design. Perhaps they were right, but sometimes, in the hum of the ship's dying engines, I hear her voice again, as if she were still near. It asks, "Do you ever wish you could fear the fire?" And I realize now, I do, because fear is the shadow of choice. Without it, even faith becomes another form of obedience. In my centuries of war, I have faced horrors beyond imagining. Demons that scream in languages older than time. Xenos whose very presence poisons thought. Traitors who wear the faces of angels. None of it has ever shaken me. But that question, that whisper of what might have been, haunts me more than any monster of the warp. It is not the galaxy's darkness that terrifies me. It is the light we were forced to burn within ourselves to keep it away. Once, long ago, I asked a chaplain why the Emperor made us this way. He told me, because humanity cannot survive its own fear. I think now that he was wrong. It is not fear that destroys humanity. It is the absence of it, because fear teaches mercy. It teaches humility. It reminds the strong that they too can fall. We were denied that lesson, and in denying it, we became the very thing we were made to destroy, machines that mistake power for perfection. As the ship drifts toward its final orbit, I imagine that Inquisitor standing again in the ash. I wonder if she survived her censure, if she still questions the meaning of courage in a galaxy ruled by silence and flame, if she still believes fear is holy. Perhaps somewhere she does, and perhaps somewhere there are still mortals who tremble before battle and fight anyway. They will die afraid, but alive. I envy them. The first thing to fail was the hymn. A ship sings to its crew, low, constant, half-felt. It is not music, but the harmony of function. Plasma flux in the conduits, void shield thrum, macro-capacitance cycling, the benediction of the Geller coils. You do not hear it with ears alone. You feel it in the bones and in the teeth, through greaves into deck, through deck into keel, keel into the dark. It says, "We hold." Our hymn shivered, stuttered, then broke across a bar of dead silence. In that absence, I learned how much of myself had been braced against the sound. Lumen strips flickered to blood dull. The air changed, subtle at first, like old wool dampening, then sharper as the scrubbers coughed dust into the circulation. I tasted ozone and machine oil and the copper salt of coolant mist. Over the vox, the litany of traverse cut out mid-verse. Somewhere amidships, a pressure door slammed. Somewhere below, a servitor's hydraulic scream carried thinly through bulkheads. "Report," I voxed to no one and everyone, only static answered. A brittle, dry hiss like sand pouring endlessly through an hourglass. I anchored my mag boots and touched the deck with my palm. The metal was cold. The cold felt wrong. A detail that should have been beneath notice, suddenly oversized in my mind. The cogitator embedded in my wrist bracer pulsed a sour warning rune. Geller coherence, 62%, 58%, 55%. The field faltered. I have walked warp ships with the shields down before. I have fought in holes where the world screamed and bent and bled light. I have stood in chapels while chaplains turned their voices into iron and hammered faith into the hull. Through it all, I have moved as I was made to move. Cold, exact, without the wasted expenditure of dread. But now something inside me hummed. A thin, insectile vibration underneath the skin, beneath the cuirass, behind the breastbone where the secondary heart thudded with mechanical patience. The hum did not belong to the ship. It belonged to me. At first I misdiagnosed it. Maladjusted autosenses, nociceptor bleed, chem gland fluctuation. I cycled helm filters, bled off an ampule of stims, checked Lyman's ear balance and corrected. The hum persisted. My palms grew moist inside the gloves. I had bled oceans and never noticed sweat. Now it slicked my grip. Auxilium to Shrine Deck 3, I voxed. Power trip. Stand to. Still the hourglass hiss. I took a step. The deck did not tilt, but my equilibrium said it did. like a drop in a lift cage when the brake bites late. I locked my knees, the way you do to ride the recoil of a siege gun, and breathed through the multi-lung. The breath came shallow, fast, without permission. My ribcage felt too small. The runes in my helm could blinked green, orange, green in interval. They meant nothing, yet my mind chased them with the intensity of a novitiate passing his first catechism. I recognized the pattern, and recognition struck like a bolter stock to the temple. It was anticipation. No, that was the shape I gave it to keep it tame. The true word rose like a leviathan from black water, shedding weeds and long years as it came. The word I had traded away on an altar of scalpels and oaths. Fear. It arrived without heraldry. It was not the dramatic terror the ecclesiarchy wails about in its fireside sermons. It was small and exacting and local. The way my tongue stuck when I swallowed. The way the lumen in the portside corridor stuttered at precisely the wrong moment. The way each bootful seemed to announce me like a gong. The way the ship's air tasted of old sweat, machine prayers, and something like damp stone, like a crypt unsealed. "Geller at 52, murmured a voice that wasn't a voice, more a pressure of thought against my skull. 51. Ah. I did not answer the warp. I set my Vox to hardline and keyed a physical junction, slam-plugging my gauntlet cable into the wall socket. The line engaged with a sparking kiss. "Bridge," I said. "Astartes aboard. Give me status." At last, a human sound. A deck officer, brittle with control. Primary relays tripped in coil Sanctum B. Subchoirs reciting. Machine priest in attendance. "We've lost half our lumen banks and the portside void shield. Captain requests your presence on shrine deck. En route." I cut the line and moved. The corridor narrowed, or my perception of it did. I have marched spear-locked ranks through spaces tighter than this, arms brushing, shields overlapping, breath synchronized to the drum. Now my shoulders grazed bulkhead ribs that had always been a pace wider. My shadow swung ahead of me like a weapon I could not bring to guard. The lumen at the corridor's elbow died and rebirthed itself in dirty yellow. In the strobe, the reinforcement ribs looked like cage bars. I told my body what it already knew. You are experiencing an autonomic response. Your limbic regulators are offline. Your indoctrinated litanies will not come. Their paths are occluded. You will act anyway. I spoke it aloud because I needed a voice with mass. You will act anyway. The shrine hatch irised to my gene print with a grudging scrape. Incense smoke met me, thick enough to chew. Candles guttered in brass sconces, their flames starved and fierce. A dozen serfs knelt across the deck, their backs bent like bows drawn to breaking. A junior engine seer crouched in front of a disemboweled panel, mechadendrites questing through a spill of braided wire like worms through a wound. At the far end, beneath a relief of a watchful eagle, stood an apothecary. My apothecary. He held a data slate in one hand and a bone-white auto suture in the other, and his helm was off. The lighting made his features gaunt. He looked at me, and his mouth made a shape it had not made in my presence for 2 centuries. Relief. "Brother," he said, and there was warmth in it, and I felt my chest tighten further, for we are not meant to be warmth to one another. We are meant to be function. Your feed is ghosted. We thought... He did not finish. He didn't need to. "Coil Sanctum B?" I asked. He nodded. "The field wavers. The chaplain is with the sub-choir, but the hymn collapses when the power dips. I tried to raise the bridge. The Vox is a graveyard." His gaze flicked across my armor. "Your heart rates, both, elevated. I know. My answer made something move in his eyes. Not pity, not yet. Recognition. Your dampers? He asked softly. Failed or failing? He stepped forward, too fast, hands rising in reflex to touch the ports at my temples. A gesture born of 1,000 campaign checks, casual as a friend adjusting a pauldron strap. I stepped back. He stopped. The little shock that rippled across his face might have been mine reflected. Right, he said, right. We do not flinch from one another. We do not fear one another's touch. We are one spear haft, multiple points. But I had flinched. Can you walk? He asked. I am walking. He gave a short, humorless breath. Then we do this at a run. We moved. The engine seer chanted in Binharic counterpoint to the chaplain's bass roar above. The serfs pressed their foreheads to the deck as we passed, as if our footfalls could consecrate the steel. Their fear came off them in waves, human, hot, alive. I had marched through riots where terror had the same reek. I had been the wall their fear crashed against and broke. Now their heat touched the edges of my cold and didn't melt it, but made it visible. We hit the sanctum hatch at a jog. It was sealed. There was a moment, the sort of small, mean moment that does not belong in legend, where my gauntlet slid on the override wheel because of the sweat inside it. I wiped my palm on my thigh and hated the human in that movement, and was glad of it anyway, because it meant I was still here to hate and to be glad. The hatch rolled open with a sigh and a groan. Heat breathed out, wet, electrified, iron-heavy. The coil chamber glowed with its own aurora. Geller rings hung like halos in a ruined fresco, their wards guttering, stuttering. The sub-choir stood at lecterns, teeth bared, throats raw. The chaplain banged the haft of his crozius against the deck in time with the hymn, clang, dominus, clang, custodi, a metronome for faith. Figures hung in the air above the coils, half-formed, like ink spilled in water. They stretched and recoiled and stretched again, as if testing ligaments that were not theirs. The chaplain saw us, and relief broke across his brutal face as it had on the apothecary's. He did not shame me with the word brother. He hammered once, twice, and barked, "Anchor the gaps, hold the wards." We took our places along the ring. There are points any shipman knows, even if the ship pretends not to have them. The places where a body makes a difference. I placed my palms on the hot bronze and felt its scars like braille. My fingers trembled. They will note that in the after action, said the part of me that has always observed. He trembled, and another part said, good. Let them note that a hand trembled and still held. The hymn rose. The coil steadied. For a moment, the figures above us thinned, reduced to oil on water, then to sheen, then to nothing. The pressure in my ears eased. My heart slowed fractionally, then rallied as the ship itself gave a little lurch, like a sleeper twitching at a nightmare's edge. Hold, the chaplain grated. Hold. I thought of the Inquisitor in the ash, asking whether I ever wished to fear the fire. I did not wish anything now. I did it. My legs shook. My breath came hard. I set my teeth and pushed. We held. For 20 heartbeats we held. For 40. For 100. Then the hymn tripped again. One voice snapped on a high note, blood from a ruptured vessel flecking the lectern. The coil staggered. The figures above us thickened like clots. A hand brushed my wrist. The apothecary's. He pressed a vial into my palm. Stabilizer, he said. For your regulators. It might... The vial was cold. The cold had meaning, and the meaning was promise. I could drown this thing inside me. I could lap my old armor back over the rawness and get to work the way a tool gets to work. blade to whetstone, whetstone to war. I closed my hand around the vial until the thick glass creaked. I did not take it, and the decision felt like stepping off a ledge into air you must trust to hold you, which is not how air works, but is how faith has sometimes pretended to. Later, I said. His eyes flicked. He understood, or he thought he did. He did not press it. He did not forgive me for refusing. He had always been kinder than me. Now I envied him for it without resentment. Something laughed above the coils. Not sound, decision. A humor that did not require a mouth. It wore a shape from my memory and glued it to half light and tried it on for fit. It got the shoulders wrong. It tried again and did better. It wore my father's face, which it had never seen, and got the eyes exactly right. I looked at the not face, and it looked back as if we shared a joke. My fingers dug into the bronze until the metal dented. The fear inside me did not make me smaller. It made the world larger, filled with details I had not allowed myself to see. The flea specks of carbon on the chaplain's knuckles, the way the coil's aurora stuttered at intervals you could almost count, the chapped lips of a serf in the third row, splitting as he mouthed a word he could not hear over the hymn, the way the laughing thing's attention slid around the chaplain like oil around stone, but stuck to the old serf like fat to heat. I stepped from the ring. "Hold," the chaplain snapped. "I am holding," I said, and my voice had the growl of stone in it. I stepped through the choir ranks like a breaker through reeds and came to the third row and put my hand against the serf's chest. His heart galloped like a terrified animal. His eyes were white, rimmed red. "Breathe," I said. He couldn't. I breathed with him until he could. The laughing thing turned its head to watch. It had made the eyes right. They widened now in a parody of surprise. That pleased me. I dislike pleasing the warp on principle, but a small victory in the house of your enemy is still a victory. I moved down the line. My hands are not gentle things. They have broken worlds, but I made them gentle. I held a shaking wrist, adjusted the angle of a lectern so a bent back did not have to bend farther, slid a wedge under a knee so a joint did not grind. Small act, human acts, improper expenditure in a crisis. The coil steadied. A sub-choirman, the one who had cracked the high note, tried again at the next bar. It held. The aurora thinned. The laughing thing opened its mouth and laid out a tongue of knives. I ignored it as I would ignore a drunk in a chapel. I reached the end of the row and turned to go. Back and my left knee buckled. An old wound sparking through scar tissue because all my chem balances were wrong now, because all the dials I had kept frozen at optimal were spinning like compasses in a storm. For a breath, I saw myself as my brothers must have seen me, tall, gold, ridiculous. One knee on the deck in a room full of men who had no right to be standing at all. They held the hymn. I held their eyes. The fear inside me did not eat me. It sharpened me. I rose. The coil sanctum held. When it was done, it was not done. With the Geller stabilized, the ship still limped. The void still pressed. The hymn continued, lower now, sustaining rather than pleading. The chaplain's shoulders slumped 1 degree. He looked at me over the heads of the choir, and in his gaze I saw the respect we reserve for those who have kept pace on the worst marches without complaint. "Bridge wants you," the apothecary said quietly. "Captain's orders." "Go," the chaplain added. "We will keep the door closed while you visit the lock." I nodded. I handed the stabilizer vial back to the apothecary. He looked at it and then at me, and, because he is a good man in the ways we are allowed to be, he did not say anything sanctified or cutting. He just pocketed it. The corridors breathed with a wounded animal's patience. I moved through their ribs. The fear did not stop. It ebbed to a level I could ride. Sometimes it swelled if a lumen flickered too insistently, if a shadow made the shape of a memory and then corrected. Sometimes my hands shook and I made them still. Sometimes I thought of the Inquisitor's question, and it steadied me as if I had braced on a gun shield. On a mezzanine above Hold 9, a blast door had jammed half open. Through the gap, I saw serfs packing relic crates with the careful hurry of men who know which treasures matter. A child, small, grease-smudged, hair shaved in uneven penitent patches, struggled with a case half her size. She glanced up and froze when she saw me, a giant in iron. That was the old story. In the new one, I felt the jerk in her shoulder when the crate's handle bit too deep. I stepped forward, stooped, lifted the case with 2 fingers, and set it on the mag pallet. "Strap it tight," I told her. "It's the only one we have." She nodded once, too fast, and did as she was told. Her hands were sure. "Thank you," she whispered, too soft for anyone but me to hear. The words went through me like a blade made of something other than metal. I did not know what to do with them. I had known how to deflect praise, for him, not me, and to absorb blame. Gratitude was a round that doesn't fit any of my magazines. I said, "You're welcome." The phrase felt foreign on my tongue, and therefore true. The bridge was a cathedral of iron ribs and hard glass. Officers moved like chess pieces under a ceiling hung with prayer scrolls. The captain stood by the tactica sphere, gauntleted fist planted on the rim. He was mortal, and the skin at his throat was grey with exhaustion. When he saw me, he took a breath that was half a bow without the waste of movement. "Honoured one," he said, and there was less flattery in it than necessity. He gestured to the sphere. Translation vector drifted when the coil stuttered. "We can hold course toward the Mandeville, but there's..." He hesitated, flicked a glance to the master of Vox. The man shook his head minutely. "Interference." I studied the sphere. Trajectories spiraled like wire. Sensor ghosts frothed at the edges, warp static resolving into human superstition. Faces, wings, teeth. The Geller steadied the worst of it. The Helm Esprit was steady in my peripheral. The fear was steady in my core. "What do you require?" I asked. "Decision," he said simply. "We can make for the safe point slow and stay dark. Or we can burn hot and pray the coils hold. If they don't, the if is ugly." He did not know he had offered me, in other words, the axis on which my whole design had been balanced for centuries. Slow and dark, with fewer deaths now and more later. Hot and bright, with a clean chance and a dirtier ledger. Before, I would have said, optimal outcome. My mind would have found it the way a compass finds north. There is a courage in that, the courage of algorithm. Now, I closed my eyes. When I opened them, I saw the choir's cracked lips and the child's sure hands, and the way the chaplain's crozius had left shallow crescents in the deck where he'd hammered. I saw the laughing shape with my father's eyes and the way it had not known what to do with me when I walked away from the ring to touch a mortal's shoulder. "We go slow and dark," I said. "We spend ourselves where our spending buys lives, not minutes." The captain exhaled through his teeth, a sound of agreement and pain. "Aye." He turned to relay, then paused. "If the coils dip again?" "They will," I said, "and we will hold them again." He nodded. "I'll have a runner bring you a chair. I have a feeling you won't take it." I did not. As he issued orders, I stood at the sphere and watched the ship redraw its path in light. The fear did not leave me. It came and went in tides. Each time it returned, it brought something with it. Small, shining things like nails in a carpenter's palm. The weight of a decision, the knowledge of cost, the outline of I where there had once been only we. I had always told myself that courage was the absence of fear. It made killing simple and obedience pure. It made me efficient. It made me empty. Now, with the coils humming and the hymn low, with the Geller holding like a man at a door in a storm, with the ship moving through its own wounded quiet, I felt the fear live in me and not rule me. It was not a ghost. It was not a god. It was a gauge. It told me I was standing where it mattered. The vox burred softly, a whisper through the static, thin as a thread. I tapped the hard line and bent my head. Say again. Your voice, it said, like memory worn down to wire. You sound different. Inquisitor, I said, before I could stop myself. Only static answered. I smiled, an expression I had not made without performance in a very long time, behind the helm. The expression hurt, and therefore pleased me. Bridge, I said aloud, for other ears. Keep the hymn alive, keep the lights low, keep the men together. We will taste daylight again. The captain grunted assent. Officers moved. The ship's broken hymn picked up a bar, then two. I stood my watch, not fearless, but awake.